Welcome to the Influence of Design webinar. Today we plan to take a look at the top trends of 2019 from a variety of different areas within the design industry. This afternoon I am joined by Liz Smith, Lead Solutions Designer, and Global Creative Director, Adrian Day. If you'd like to pop any of your comments into the chat, we'll be able to discuss those as we go through the presentation. Over to you guys.
Hello, welcome everybody. Right then, let's kick off.
So this is us.
Well, that took a long time.
Nathan's just introduced us. So we'll just quickly say a bit about what we do. So here at Kineo, I work in the bid team, putting together solutions for new business that we might have. And yeah, going to different proposals and pitches and seeing what's coming up in the marketplace.
My role, I look after the brand between Kineo and the clusters. I also look after the welfare of a team of graphic artists on a global scale.
So as Nathan said, we're going to be taking some different sources of design inspiration today. I think in the past, we've always kind of looked at web design and graphic design, and they've been big things within the industry in terms of where we get inspiration from. We wanted to cast our net a little bit wider and look at other areas of design as well, such as products, packaging, interiors, fashion, just there's hundreds of areas, obviously, so we can't cover everything, but we've brought together some main trends that we saw coming through a lot of different areas, and we'll be discussing those today.
And I suppose it's some of the aspects that we like as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and things that work for learning particularly as well.
So these are the 5 areas that we'll cover in depth. We'll give you a bit of an overview about each of the sections. We'll show you some examples that we've seen outside on the web and maybe incorporate some of our own examples that we've created internally. So we'll be going through user experience, artificial intelligence and representation, ethics and sustainability. So let's go straight into user experience.
Yeah, so this is something that's obviously been around for quite a while and something that people have probably been aware of already. I mean, the term was first coined in the early 1990s, but obviously it's changed a lot and it's developing every day. And the idea is that in 2019, this is only going to get more personalized, more agile, with new interfaces becoming more prolific in the market. So some of our key hints and tips, I guess, in terms of dealing with user experience are to take note of best industry design practices. So there's no need to kind of reinvent the wheel. I think the companies out there that create these, such as Google, Apple, they really are the experts in the field. So by using those guidelines, you can kind of tie into what the key things that are happening on the web.
Yeah, making it personalized and that user interaction. So, looking at how voice activated things have increased in the market. And we've been looking internally, obviously, at this aspect around the wireframe in the prototyping aspect of that as well.
Yeah.
And what is the best approach, really?
Yeah, sorry, Adrian. So it's about what's the best metaphor for representing what's going to be. I was reading about game design, video game design. And in that, when you're starting to get into 3-dimensional worlds and so on, is necessarily a wireframe going to be able to represent
convey that? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So it's about what's the best method for what you're trying to show and focusing on journeys and mindsets rather than kind of static screens.
Yeah, and looking at the storytelling aspect.
Yeah.
That's from not just the written aspect, but the use of the typography, setting a really good hierarchy within that area.
Yeah, and I think the storytelling tied in with the user experience design is key as well. It should definitely bring people on a journey and take them through the learning. And that's going to be crucial in terms of making that obvious to learners from using those key signals and indicators that are used on the web and in technology.
And I think it's bringing that aspect of copywriting. That seems one of the big key things out there, bringing that from the advertising industry into our world, really.
Definitely. And I guess it's a key thing to say in terms of user experience. Might sound quite obvious, but it should be intuitive. So it should be fairly obvious what you have to do. And it's just making sure that as things change, we're keeping up with those trends, really.
Lovely. So obviously we've just touched on the fact that Google and Apple have got their own UI tools set out there. So, really, as we said, we don't need to reinvent these things. It's taking all the measures and that from these two giants, really. They set the standards, and really we should, follow suit, really.
Exactly. And there's just key things, aren't there, Adrian, in terms of things like using certain web fonts and so on to make sure
keeping
that
sizes consistent, positioning, all the rest of it. And there is, it's kind of curious when you look into these two pieces that there is some differences between them as well. So as much as these are setting the standards, they have differences of opinion.
Yeah. So there are sometimes some different things. And I think it's thinking about, as always, the audience and the learner and what they're trying to get out of it. So what works best for our methods. And also later on, we're going to be talking about representation. And I think in terms of the accessibility as well, all kind of ties together with the user experience side of things as well. So we've just got some other examples. We were particularly thinking about interfaces and identifications that we use kind of commonly every day now. And these are becoming much more voice activated rather than touch activated. And that's something that we've been kind of considering and thinking about how that could make a difference in the
learning.
Design and learning industries.
Obviously not all of us have Tesla cars, and the interface on that is rather large, but in the car that I have, it's got a similar sort of interface. You can talk to it, interact. It has to be really easily scannable, because obviously you're driving, you're in a moving vehicle. So it's great how these sort of technologies try and create that ease of use. By making things voice activated, you can obviously call, talk to people. You don't actually need to press any buttons anymore. They have to be also, the user interface has to tie in with things that are on the steering wheel. So you have to be able to click through to get to certain points. But it's a, it's a beautiful piece of design. And Disney's Magic Band. For anybody that's been to Disney, and I haven't, unfortunately, it's such a great little piece of technology. You can preload it with things so that you can go around it's not sort of jump queues, but plan ahead of yourself, can't you, really?
Yeah, and it's that prepayment idea as well. I know one of our clients uses this in schools. So they have a system where the children will, they can load up a card or a wristband or similar with their lunch money and then use that to pay each day. So it's things like that, and then not having to carry any cash, and that's helped to kind of avoid bullying situations. So again, that's kind of just, these technologies are just becoming more and more prevalent in people's everyday lives, and I think they're going to expect that same level of engagement when it comes to their learning.
When you think of the age group that these are generally aimed at, they're going to be some of our next people that are going to be creating or even being involved in e-learning.
Definitely.
So their expectations are going to be a lot greater than our current audience. So, especially with that as well, it's brilliant. Connects online. So you can download all your photos and everything at the end of it. I put this in because I thought it relates to some of our other subjects, this aspect of 3D being used. Yeah, Liz. Yeah, I can see that. And it's got it's funny, it's got a comical element, which humor plays a real part, especially in trying to convey messages. I think the UI is really nice on it. When you look at the website for Toy Fight, really easy to navigate. It's got visual clues for the navigation as well. And when you go into the content, it's laid out simply. Really easy to use.
And I think that's the key. And one thing that perhaps won't come across on this webinar, but if you guys go and take a look at some of these websites yourself, you'll see the kind of transitions and the movement within the pages, again, which all indicates which direction you should be moving in, how you should be scrolling, how you should be progressing through the content. So again, it gives you those visual indications. And I think thinking about, people who are more or less familiar with this. So again, thinking about your audience group is really important. Are they all kind of, millennials or, Generation X who's going to be, really on board with this kind of thinking, or are they, not? And how much of a guide you have to give people through things. So I think making things exploratory is great and allowing people to move around them, but also at times people might need a little bit of help. So it's just thinking about how to bring all those things into play.
Everything on screen has to be useful, doesn't it? As I said to you before, that fact of, in 2000, people spent 12 seconds on average looking at a page. and then that's gone down over the years to 9.
Yeah.
You know, and when you think that to 8, should I say, and when you when you think that you know, the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds, we do have to worry, don't we? So we've got to make sure that everything we put on these pages is relevant and meaningful, really.
Yeah, and I think your first
As an
visit and
attractive.
your first view is crucial, isn't it, in terms
Yes,
of
most
engaging
definitely.
people. So we've just got a few of our own examples in here as well of things we've done as Kineo. So the Adapt HTML5 framework is obviously an open source project, but we use it a lot in our learning, and we've kind of developed some key interactions for it. And again, it just uses all those simple kind of Apple, Google web-based interactions in terms of how you progress, how you move, how you scroll. The scrolling pages are particularly good for responsive design, because then as you resize the screen, if you're on a mobile device or so on, it becomes really easy to lay out the text in terms of scrolling passages and not have to worry about overruns or anything like that. And I think you can see through some of these designs as well how they carry on the visual style and the indication through it.
Lead you down the page.
Yeah, lead the eye, don't they?
Very striking, and that aspect of using in some of these cases a bit of bold typography or a bold image, and certainly bold colours.
Mm-hmm.
It's got that spacing around it, which is really nice. So it's clean, the content easy to see what you need to get from it. So let's go to the next.
Yeah, and we also wanted to include some indication of mobile first design. I mean, this isn't always, I think, necessary. I think it's, again, thinking about your audience and how likely they are to view on a mobile. We found with our clients, particularly retail, is an area where people are more likely to have access to mobile devices where they won't have access to, you know, a laptop computer. So it's about thinking about how we can really get people the key information they need on their phone, get it to them quickly, you know, be able to spend 5 minutes or something, you know, in a break, looking up some key information that's going to help you sell more of that product, and then linking those two things together with intelligent data.
And in some cases, we've just gone on and done mobile devices that are just pure text.
Yeah,
they've not needed too much visuals, so it's quite nice, the examples that we're shown here, where they are kind of stripped back, except for the menu system, but quite easy to use, you know, and very up to date, quite current.
So that's the kind of key examples we wanted to talk about. Some of our top tips here, we're just about, as we said with the examples, keeping things very simple, very clear, more visuals and less text is the kind of key.
In certain areas, but obviously, depending on your audience, you have to play to that, don't you?
Yeah.
Certainly don't overuse animation. You know, we will be talking about things like micro animations and things like that maybe later, but certainly use them, make sure that they're needed, they're necessary. Ensure, as I've said on the next point, they're meaningful, they convey something. Otherwise, people will switch off.
Yeah, and I think obviously a key design principle is a clear call to action. So whether that's within the learning itself, what action to take next, or what action to take outside of the learning, getting to those things as soon as possible is great. And considering translation as well. I'm sure people have talked about that a lot in the past, but there's still some great principles there in terms of using iconography for buttons rather than words and so on. So thinking about that and thinking about things on a global scale, which again we'll be looking at in some of the other areas today.
What about the aspect of accessibility? You know, thinking about that. Do we need to think about that, or will the tool take care of some of that?
I think the tool does, to a certain extent, take care of some aspects of it, but it's definitely still worth considering, because even in the language that you use, the way that you refer to things is really important to make sure that you get that right, the images that you use and so on. We've got a section later on which looks a bit more about representation and diversity, so we'll look at accessibility a bit more then. But yeah, definitely another key part of user experience too. So that's the end of this first section on user experience. Any other questions? Nathan's saying no. So we'll carry on. Of course, feel free to keep adding to the chat if you have any comments or questions. We'll try to pick them up at the end of each section, and if not, go back to them at the end. So
yeah, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. As some of you know, or maybe not know, that we are totally surrounded by this, aren't we, really?
The robots are already here.
Without even realizing, whether it's data crunching analytics for people like Amazon and Netflix, to help predict what customers like or enjoy, running modern eating systems, which we'll go through, or just voice activated devices that are prevalent, certainly as presents this year, weren't they, really?
Anything that really gives you a recommendation based on your previous behavior, so Netflix, Amazon, all those kind of things, say to you, well, you like this, so you might like this. They're all using artificial intelligence. It may not seem like a big deal, and I think that's probably a light touch case of it, but it's all, like you say, it is all around us without necessarily even thinking about it.
And when designing for this, it is really necessary to make sure you do early prototyping and iteration. It's got to be really rigorously tested. So that's involving other members of the team, rather than it being created within a small group. You want to build up a bigger group to really pull it apart.
Definitely.
Strength test it, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And use your kind of technical minds to do that. I think Adrian and I obviously come from the creative side and want to push the creativity as much as possible. But yeah, you're right. Having that kind of standardization, the testing, the rigor is also really important. I think we can see AI as something that's very computer-led and not very human. And I think that's when it's kind of jars the most with us, and when it fits in with our lives and kind of helps us in a way that we don't even notice it, that's when it works best. So we kind of put here that it should be an extension of human capabilities. It should humanize the experience. If you think about the voices that they use and things like Siri, they deliberately choose kind of sat navs or whatever.
Tend to be female voices, don't they?
And I think you can change them. They use soft voices. They really try and have that human aspect to them, rather than making it clear that it's a kind of machine-led thing. I think that's important.
And I suppose using AI, it helps us to crunch a lot more data, doesn't it?
Definitely,
and get to a resolution quicker than it would involving just humans.
So I think that last point is really thinking about it not as a gimmick. I think some of these things, the way that they get adopted in the first instance, does it really have an advantage over another method? Well, it should, because it should be able to gather that intelligent data and then give you a way to respond back to that.
So we've been looking at nests, really, even from an aspect of design, how you can control it remotely, works on the phone. They've even thought about it being sort of seamless in their next version. So rather than as being surrounded, which we are in our houses or homes, surrounded by technology and them being glaring, they've tried to make it fit into the surroundings more. So they put this sort of opaque cup that you can get to place over it, so it diffuses it, makes it similar to probably how your house has been decorated, or it has that sort of lovely diffused sort of lighting to it.
Yeah, and then the app is kind of just the key thing in terms of the controls, isn't it? So everything's done through the app. So personally, you don't even have to look at the physical object itself. It's just the controls that you're looking at through the technology.
Then we look at Spotify. I mean, I suppose most of us have this, and it's great, the fact that you can be listening to a certain type of music and it offers up loads of recommendations for you that gets you into a totally different genre, which obviously is all done seamlessly in the background. Even all those your listening habits, it records everything, and that aspect of the social aspect of it is been great, really, for anybody that loves music. It's changed the arena, hasn't it, really?
And I think even the concept of Spotify is something that we've been considering as this idea of having playlists. And, in terms of learning, you can have certain things that you have to listen to, or, then there's things that are your preference. And again, the recommendations are then made based on what you've looked at before and, using that intelligence to then suggest other pieces of learning. So I think that idea of playlists really comes through from this. And if you use the Spotify metaphor for that, it's quite clear to people what you're trying to do.
We've got similar menu systems.
Yeah, definitely. Our filter menu system that we uses a lot of this type of behaviour to manage how people go through the learning itself.
And then obviously we've talked about assistants in the home. These are absolutely brilliant for anybody that's got one. Especially if you're doing anything like cooking or anything like that, and you can just call up things. And the fact that they all talk to each other is great, and the UI aspect, how clear clear everything is, the information on such small screens. They've really thought about the layout and everything, all the aspects of that, and how they interact and interface with all these different systems. Then we looked at Duolingo, which is that is a really interesting thing, where it actually, if you look at some of the languages, it has an aspect where you can practice your German, for instance. So you can start speaking German into the phone, and it'll let you know whether your pronunciation is correct. I have difficulty saying that in English, but there again, it's done in a way, it's got cartoon characters, really simple sort of imagery,
And it's very clever how Duolingo works behind the scenes in terms of giving you enough repetition to have that spaced rehearsal practice, which is really important for learning, but also working out what level you're at, how much to stretch you, giving you some things that are more difficult, and especially the engagement. So in terms of keeping you coming back to it, sending you notifications, rewarding you for visiting it every day, so on, all these things kind of really help.
And the different ways it tests your ability, either through voice or written.
Exactly. So it goes through all those different skills.
And then we looked at DeepMind, which is I suppose, scientific mission to push the boundaries of AI. I think it's been connected or sponsored by Google. So they're looking at trying to solve complex problems, should I say, real world challenges like climate change, healthcare, and things like that.
So we've got a few of our own examples. So we've started using these kind of basic chatbots in the learning that we use, and they use a very simple functionality, but it's another way of kind of getting to the core of some content, asking some questions, diverging on some different routes really through learning. So by picking different options, you kind of take different pathways through. So that really replicates the kind of chat box functionality that you might have seen, on websites, especially retail websites, where they're asking if you want any help.
Retail, travel websites.
Exactly, yeah. And then we've also got some technology that allows you to interact with your peers. So I think something that is perhaps lost by doing online training is that kind of interaction with people, everyone doing it at the same time, basically, that you get if you were to say all be in a room together. So we've created some ways of doing that through asking questions that use a kind of polling mechanism. So everyone can vote, say how, especially for kind of soft skills, grey areas, everyone votes on whether they think this was acceptable. This one is about interview skills. So it's, were you comfortable with the questions asked in the interview? You can kind of rate that on a scale, and then you can answer a bit more of a specific question, and we can see who answers what and where you measure up against either everybody else or an expert.
And this is done through our tool interactive
yes,
video.
That's right. Yeah. And that's kind of done through an external server that we use to gather that information anonymously, so it all kind of complies with the lovely GDPR guidelines.
Oh, Liz.
So that was kind of a very brief tour of AI. Obviously, there's loads there. So yeah, lots to talk about, and we've got some other areas to go through. So again, important to talk about the responsible use of data. So GDPR. So it's very good that everything needs to be kept anonymized. So you're not sharing things. Using machines to do the heavy lifting, kind of. They search the most relevant information for you. They search all the combined data sources, and that can help with the evaluation of your learning as well, improving value and return on investment. Also, sorry, I thought you were going to looking for meaningful patterns and algorithms, but also making the outpoints of these really easy to understand from a learner perspective. So it's about how you present that back as much as what you gather, I think.
So taking inspiration from the books, Information is Beautiful. Yes, I know. Information is Beautiful, which shows you loads of data visualization techniques. And we'll talk about that and maybe show you some examples later on.
Okay, so that's the end of that section. If there's no further questions, we'll continue. So we're going to talk a bit about representation and inclusivity now. Obviously, we're trying to find a way of providing a more comprehensive look of the human experiences. We might not all have the same abilities and needs, but the way products and services are designed often assumes that we do. So I think it's important that when you're creating a global program, you don't end up going down a route where it becomes very generic and then isn't representative of certain people.
Yeah, making things either, you know, realistic, not perfectly formed people, you know. And we'll show you some examples on the next page about that.
We'll go on to that now, actually, because I think there's different ways of representation. So one approach could be that you don't show kind of human form directly, you know, you use more abstract approaches.
Characters.
Or another way, obviously, is to try and be more inclusive in terms of the diversity that you use, ethnicity, able-bodied or differently able people, and so on. So you've got all those kind of variations within it.
Yeah, it's all about smashing down those barriers, isn't it? And you can see how people have changed things here by including diversity in many different forms. So this was really good. I don't know if anybody's seen the Apple video that was created, and it was all created for around representation and diversity. It's a really powerful piece of video. Goes through the story of this woman who's got severe disabilities, and as you progress, it shows you all these other people that come into it who also have disabilities that might include partially sighted or hearing or language issues, and it goes through this, and at the end culminates in the fact that this woman has actually created it, and she created it through clicks that she had on the side of the wheelchair that she managed to do with her head. So she controlled an Adobe piece of software, so Adobe Premiere and After Effects, and pieced together this entire movie.
Yeah, incredible.
Which really blows your mind. And it just shows you that these companies, they are thinking like that. They want to be inclusive. They want to make sure that people do have the abilities to do these different things.
Yeah, so again, we've just got some of our own examples, and we've started with some that either in the photographic images there, you can see, you know, a different representation of people, or we've got some which use a much more abstract approach. So they use these kind of little blobs or little characters that really don't take any human form. So again, that can be a way, if you're looking at a global scale, of getting away from the idea of having to represent every individual person, especially if it's a, you know, one guide character, for example, that's taking you through the learning.
Yeah, I mean, we created obviously these things for certain supermarkets where we created vegetables that related to different countries, but it added that comical element, and it stopped a lot of issues that we might have faced if we had gone down the route of creating characters of hairstyles, color, all the rest of it, you know. So it really was quite effective. We've also, in our own aspects of how we work within the community, we've worked and done brainstorms with local community groups, and in this case, there's an image here that shows you how we work with a group of people that were deaf, and we got through that we had a series of people that were working with us as doing sign language. A real eye-opener as to how to get across that information and still get something from that. It was a real valid experience. What they created at the end of it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And then we have two examples of how we've had to think about accessibility when it's come to brands, how we've had to either use very large fonts, certainly not using caps there, and we've had to change people's colours, some of the palettes. A lot of brands don't think about accessibility when it comes to their colour palettes.
So why is that important, Adrian, in terms of the colours that you use?
Legibility.
Yeah.
You know, and you get a lot of soft colours that are used, and then they put white text or white icons on there, and you really can't
see it well on the screen.
You know.
And this is just an example of a course that we did in our APAC region for the New Zealand Sign Language. And this was a really interesting design challenge as well, in terms of how we were showing everything and making sure that we could use that, and using some of that, I guess, Duolingo idea in terms of how people learn languages. But in this case, it was a sign language. Yeah. So it had a lot of video clips in, a lot of practical exercises for people to carry out, to just continually keep testing them, checking how they were getting on. Everything really represented in the learning also had the sign language representation next to it, as you can even just see from the menu design on the left there.
And the characters were all based on actual people that work there, so that was quite fun as well, I think, for the people to create it.
Okay, so we're going a little bit quicker now, so we sped through that one a little bit, but I think there's obviously a lot to say about representation and getting that right. Again, the key is really thinking about your audience and what's going to represent maybe what they are now, but also what you'd like them to be in the future. So not just thinking about keeping that the same, but how you'd like your workforce to be represented.
And certainly making all the scenarios very realistic and reliable, whether that's through the means of photographic content, depending there again, it relates back to your audience.
Yes, exactly. And don't making assumptions about what people are able to do. So I think when we were talking about the user experience, we were kind of saying, oh, people might intuitively know how to do this or how to do that, but there should be help available and additional things that you can use. Obviously, screen reader accessibility and things like that are very important for that community.
And you've got to take into consideration age, gender, ethnicity, abilities, all of that when it comes to what you're actually creating and how it looks and the people within it, you know, how you divide or show the characters, really.
And I think not just from a kind of visual point of view, but thinking about cultural differences. I think we find very often that companies will have a standard, say, code of conduct or code of ethics that they would like to be applied to a global audience, but that people in different regions might have a very different experience of the world and how they interact with it. And it's just thinking about that and making sure that we can create something that does resonate with everybody and doesn't end up resonating with nobody.
And I suppose one thing I find interesting about it is the fact that visually it's slightly easier, you know, to get images or create something visual, but from a written aspect, I suppose getting into that mindset of somebody with a disability.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously everyone comes from their own perspective and the way you can't change the way that you see the world depending on where you were born, how you were brought up and so on. But I think it's really important to listen to other people's stories and make sure that you're then playing them back within any kind of representation. So whether it's media or learning or any area of design, really. So again, it's about that storytelling aspect we were talking about and making sure that that really does kind of reach a wider range of people. So someone's mentioning there that colorblind people can have trouble with, some of those color interactions. And I think it plays into dyslexia as well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
They're things to definitely avoid in terms of accessibility. Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, and we do have set up here to test for all of that. And we do our best to do that if we know that that's going to be an issue.
Yeah. Okay, so the ethics is just really simple thing to cover.
Well, let's see, Liz. Let's see what we've got.
So I think it's really interesting in the technology area recently, looking at lots of stories coming out of Silicon Valley of just how many people are seeing the effects of technology and negatively. I guess even in that area where it's really been
well, that's their livelihood, isn't it?
Exactly. Really been pushed on the rest of the world. And they're now kind of sending their children to these schools where they just play and they don't have...
And we'll talk about that, yeah.
Don't have any interaction with devices and so on. So I think particularly looking at how it affects children and young people that are obviously going to be growing up to be our young workforce in the coming years. But also thinking about vulnerable people and how it can affect them as well. So there is an ethical case throughout
that level of protection, really, and safeguarding, isn't it?
Definitely. And just really thinking about how it can benefit people positively. I don't think it's putting a spin on technology where we have to see it as all one way or the other, but we just have to be aware of these things so that we can manage it more carefully.
Like anything, there's pros and cons to all of these things.
So then empowering our users, but also protecting them. So I think one thing that we've talked about a lot, and I'm sure a lot of e-learning companies are the same, is micro-learning and that ability to do small chunks of learning kind of at any time. But there's also a slight area of protection that you need to go into with that in terms of how much do you really want people to be working
outside of work.
Exactly, yeah. And some countries have more laws on that
Is it that
than
expectation?
others. Yeah, and it's like, what is the expectation of your business, and making sure people have kind of work-life balance and all those things. So just because, I think that's what the main point about, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And making sure that there's those safeguards in place to protect against.
And you've got to think about well-being. It's got to be wrapped up in all of that, hasn't it? Really?
Yeah, and I think that plays into the last point there, which is we've seen a lot less in terms of engagement with something that we used to measure in learning. So how much uptake things got, how much people were kind of signing into learning, but then maybe not necessarily looking at the other side of things, like how that traveled through, how we measured the value and the impact of that outside of the learning itself.
And on the user, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And that's becoming a kind of key issue now, in terms of it's more important to think about that transferable output in terms of how that comes through into the workplace.
Yeah, so we looked at various things, and one of the things here, a company called Responsible Travel. You'd think, well, how responsible is it really? Travel, it's hard to stop, but I suppose companies have to think about, we can't just stop going places. So this company thinks about, right, I know we'll still go to India, but what we'll do, we'll employ the people that work over there. So they brought all these small companies that probably wouldn't see light of day together on a site that people then can go through. They employ local people.
Yeah.
It has to be sustainable, so it's got a responsible aspect to that. So they have to be able to show that they can get rid of their waste. It's all recyclable, and it's got great ethics around it. I mean, it's well worth exploring even for ideas for holidays, but such a good company. And we've looked at, obviously we talked about children. I mean, I have a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old, should I say, and I'm battling with him at the moment regarding technology and screen time.
Like
it does have pros in the classroom. It can make learning more engaging, can't it, really?
Definitely.
You can create things like online polls or quizzes. I mean, I can't understand how teachers go about doing all of that currently. It must be a real minefield. You've got to be so careful, haven't you, trying to get kids involved at school and then at home with technology. I suppose it's got cons because it's distracting, isn't it, as well? It can be distracting within the classroom.
And from the ethical standpoint as well, we were looking at some fashion trends and things that were coming through, and that inspired a lot of the visual styles, which we'll look at a little bit later. But I found it really fascinating. There was some reports last year about high-end fashion companies that destroy a lot of their merchandise at the end of the year or the end of the season, because they don't want it to be counterfeited, and then to lose value. And apparently it's pretty widespread practice in retail, which they're looking to try and change. People kind of just burning like thousands.
Stuff that they don't need.
Exactly. So, and obviously there's a lot of implications of that for the environment and so on. So, and then it's looking at, if we change those things, what are more sustainable ways of doing it? So this is a good crossover between the kind of ethics and sustainability, which is our next topic, which is thinking about things like fake fur. So a lot of brands have come out this year and said, they'll no longer be using animal products. They're moving away from real fur and so on. They're going to use fake fur, but that has a environmental effect.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it's made out of petroleum and acrylic products to form something else. I mean, even just thinking about that can't be that great on the people that are creating that stuff in the first place. No,
exactly, and it can have obviously environmental consequences. So I think it's just about thinking through, well, if we change this, what are the implications of that solution?
Yeah, but you're seeing a lot of companies around the world that are thinking, right, I know what I can do with that. And some of the images that we show here are using byproducts of the meat industry. And in this case, they've used hares, rabbits, and various animals on a global scale to make the product. Or actually they're thinking, well, there's a lot of that product already made. Let's reimagine some of old. So they're reinventing or, changing old vintage furs into something new.
Yeah. So again, just a few examples from us. I think from our point of view, we're just thinking about where we've helped companies kind of with e-learning that is related to ethics. But obviously there's an ethical way of making things as well, which is kind of a different point. But we've got a few examples which I'll just go through quickly. So we've got one here about kind of growth mindset, and really taking that idea of kind of, you know, not being stuck in the moment and having that agile mindset as you move on. Another one here, which is about union representation. So this is kind of a key public sector one, which is, you know, more of a service for people. What is the purpose of the union, and helping people to understand that so they can be represented within their own industry or business. And then some charity examples here. So we've done some work with Macmillan using interactive video, and this looks at how to talk to people. You know, the problem was that people were finding was that where people were asking for donations and so on in the street, a lot of people would come up to them, know Macmillan, know the name, and start talking to them about, you know, a friend or family member who's been through that. And it was about helping them to have constructive conversations and know the right thing to say, because obviously that's a very difficult kind of social situation to be in, and making sure those people always felt supported. So and so our top tips, I guess, in terms of ethics are to think, again, it always goes back to the audience and considering them, and thinking about your sector, I guess, and what the level of awareness is. Are people already, you know, hugely aware of the things that go on in that industry, or is it, you know, a little bit quieter, so you might need to draw awareness to certain aspects?
So that education aspect.
Definitely, and then looking into the effects of alternative solutions. I think we mentioned, you know, the fake fur example there, and thinking about, you know, if we do something different, is that going to then have a different negative consequence, or can we, you know, get a benefit out of that solution? So that's a key one. And then really, I think getting in external experts. So a lot of the people that with the high-end fashion example, which was Burberry, they brought in people from this Ellen MacArthur's Foundation, Make Fashion Circular, the Greenpeace have a campaign, Detox My Fashion. So it's those people who are really the experts. Getting advice from them, really, and hearing from them can really help you in terms of knowing the right things to do. I don't think anyone expects anyone to have all the answers.
No, because it's going to change.
Exactly. So, and it's going to continue to evolve. So we just need to kind of listen, I guess, again, to those people.
Yeah, and that circular aspect plays into our next topic, which is all around sustainability.
Yeah, so we'll continue, and obviously just feel free to add any more questions to the chat as we go. I think that's a really good point about technology. It can make life a lot easier in terms of self-learning, but it definitely plays a role in terms of I think that there is an element of self-control that comes into it, and if that's going to be difficult for people, there might need to be kind of regulation around that. So, you know, we can think about how we release e-learning, for example. So we might only allow people to do a certain amount a week or something, so we can make sure they're not, you know, spending too much of their free time.
And it's certainly got to fulfill more than one need when creating something, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
You know, it's certainly got to have that growth to it. And looking at nature, I mean, nature has the answer to lots of things. And when you start looking at it in terms of utilizing it in aspects of design, it's amazing. So when we show and talk about some of these ideas, you'll really see that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it's not just something that's a nice to have now, it's something that's crucial to have as part of your business, and people will look for in brands and seek out brands that do that. And so it's kind of having that as part of your commitment to
your own environment, place of work, well-being. So thinking about members of your staff, and then the greater aspects of the community that you work in or live in.
Yeah, local area and so on.
So, I mean, one of the real obvious things around sustainability when you think of design is probably architecture, you know, and how they're really trying to, because we all work in cities or towns where there's loads of building going on, and a lot of the time it tends to be made out of cheaper materials, of concrete, pre-made, pre-manufactured, you know, and in some cases you can see people really thinking about the effects the building has on people's well-being and the environment, and these are some really good cases here. This one is amazing. It's like a prototype that somebody's been making over the years, where it's a modular. So that aspect of something that's sustainable and can grow really fits into this module. So you can buy these complexes on one level. You can then create your own community by building those up to be like a skyscraper.
Yeah.
You can then create your own sort of community-based farms, shops. So they're trying to
Incredible.
think of trying to create places that are sustainable, not just from you living, working there, but you can grow, you can nurture
Exactly,
things
yeah.
there, and that's what being all about sustaining is.
I think the area of product design is fascinating on this kind of topic, because there's just so many things now that are not only being made from kind of recycled materials. The furniture example here in the bottom left are made from kind of other materials, aren't they, that have been recycled?
Yeah,
but they can also be taken apart. So it's again thinking about that double usage.
What's the next stage of it? So you're not just thinking about what you've created. You're thinking about what's going to happen to that. So like you've got some packaging there that's compostable, and it's not about. I think the next stage is not about recycling. It's about things that will compost.
Yeah, exactly.
That degrade,
And also the sustainability becomes part of the design. So you were explaining to me that these chairs that you've got shown there in the middle kind of each have a very individual design because of the way that the material is constructed. It's just slightly different every time.
So it's made out of fishing nets from a sustainable fish farm. And the metal's also taken from there after time, after it's worn. So obviously anything to do with the recycling of plastics, you're going to get something individual.
Yeah, and it becomes a feature, not just a positive environmental thing as well. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
So somebody mentioned upcycling. The one in the bottom corner is about upcycling. It was done by a Swedish company that really were looking at their other main Swedish company, which is a top left, IKEA, about what they were doing or what happened to a lot of their products. So they managed to get hold of some of their products that had been discarded and made them into something new.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's what that's about.
Crucial.
Yeah.
I think we'll skip on. This is just looking at some more of the kind of local examples, as Adrian was mentioning, in terms of the architecture and the way things are designed. But we're
running behind
time, so we're going to carry on.
So we often have to think about this in terms of what we're doing. We all go to major exhibitions. For anybody that goes to things like Learning Technologies or go to any exhibitions at Excel, there's a lot of waste that goes on. So over the years, we're trying to do our best. So we create objects that are going to last not just for the show. They have at least a year's worth of running them, if not longer. So when we do our print run, it's going to last that time. The stand was made so we could then bring it back to the office. It had AR elements on there that were usable. So we brought most of the stuff we took there back, and it's been used, and it's still in our office today. We then, if we take any items, we think of things like using postcards. I know it's printed, it's made out of recycled paper.
Yeah.
But it's something that's going to have another use.
Yeah.
So it's not just, hopefully, pray to God, it's not just chucked in a bin, but it's actually then reused.
Yeah, reused again.
We do cover aspects of, obviously, we work within our local communities, so we're showing stuff around that. So it isn't just about recycling.
Yeah, and it's kind of what we were saying about it being, it has to be part of your company's DNA and their footprint in terms of who they are. People are definitely looking for that seal of approval, whether that's the kind of ISO accreditation or similar, to say that you have that. And you need to plan for that. You have to have a plan, a budget, maybe a team to make sure that takes place, or, a general awareness within your business about it.
Yeah, and we do that here. We have a community program. I encourage other companies to do that. It's fulfilling. It's great for people's well-being, and it really benefits, getting your name around the local area and seeing what's going on there. Can be very creative also.
So we're just going to finish off. There were our kind of key topics that we wanted to look at in terms of trends. We just wanted to finish off with a few key visual trends. Again, I know I said I didn't want to concentrate too much on graphic design this time, but there are obviously things that are coming through that you should be aware of. So there's some key ones here. I think if we skip straight to the examples,
let's go straight in there. So we've got this aspect, and a lot of these are still carrying over from last year. We did this talk last year, but looking into what
much more visual, wasn't it? Rather than
And we've still got certain aspects. So we've got the aspects of 3D graphics, but it's that realism to the 3D graphics in these cases, and using it as 3D typography as well. So it's that expansion, but using the bold colors. You can go to the next. Using bold colors still carries on, and we still, obviously, we want to show you bits that we use. We use it in our own branding. This 3D, we tend to animate most of these things. And we've used it there in some of our other ideas. There's this aspect of asymmetrical or overlapping elements or eclectic design, and wrapped them all in one. That is a real mouthful, I know, Liz. But you'll see these as graphic design trends.
Yeah.
There again, they've been going on probably over the last couple of years. You'll see this on Sky Sports, on BT Sports, with a type being displayed like that. Some people like it. It's not great
Accessibility
not
again.
great
You gotta
accessibility.
think about, yeah.
So you have to pick and choose what you really want to take from these things, really, because it lends itself in the world of advertising, but in the terms of e-learning, you've got to think about that.
And you've got to always think of people viewing on a device or a computer and the difference that might take.
So you're looking at, obviously, asymmetrical shapes, so putting images inside not just square boxes that we've done over years, but, thinking outside the box. Wow. And using colour layers and tints that go over each other. And then there's this aspect of using a modern mid-century illustration style that's kind of playful. So looking back at some of the great sort of iconic graphic design in terms of some of the patterns, pulling in some of that aspect of 3D into this. This thing,
and I think
well.
the character or people representations are interesting, aren't they, in terms of what we were saying earlier about diversity. This bottom left one kind of trying to be more representative of real bodies and things like that.
And like the top things, that being playful. That's a big aspect. And especially if you're looking at illustrations turning into animations, they've got to have that element of quirk about them. In terms of colours, and we're still in that aspect of using duotones and photo tinting, which is represented, making things look like they might be out the 1970s, which is quite interesting. And it's used there again on packaging. It's used on a wide range. There is a load of trends that are for this year, and it's quite diverse. Yeah.
Thanks, Adrian. So that was just a kind of quick look into some of the visual trends there, as well as the interesting concepts that we've been looking at today. So just to take away then, these are kind of 5 key things that we saw coming through all areas of design, really, whether that was products, packaging, fashion, interiors, exteriors, all sorts of different areas. These really stood out in terms of user experience. So whether that's how someone uses a product, how they view something online, how they interact with whatever it might be. The artificial intelligence, so thinking again about the interaction, but also what the data that it's gathering, but both how that is captured and how that is presented back. Representation and inclusivity in terms of being more diverse, being more true to the human experience in terms of saying what's really there. The ethical standpoint in terms of ethics and sustainability, I guess, are kind of combined, aren't they? I think really,
all 5 are run through each other in a way.
Exactly. But the ethics in terms of that being part of your business practice, and also the sustainability and thinking about the decisions that you make and how those might impact on local communities, environment, and so on. So that's a kind of our key messages from today, I guess. The last couple of things that we've just got to finish with are the colour of the year, because we love...
Well, it goes without saying.
We've got to have the colour of the year in there.
Living coral. Pantone announce it every year. We've gone from ultraviolet.
Yeah, I think it was millennial pink and then ultraviolet and then coral. So we're still very much in the pink peach region.
We are, yeah. We've gone pastel. Doesn't always work, does it?
No.
Within our, especially after talking about accessibility. But take from that whatever you would like, really.
Yeah. So they're kind of and then the final thing was just about how we get inspired. So again, we don't just want to be taking inspiration from the key things, which I think is kind of been advertising, web design, graphics. All of those are absolutely great and give us great inspiration, but we're trying to pull from wider than that as well now.
We have a database that we use. We use Dropmark, that's got about 50 keyword elements in there that really helps us to keep on top of things, really.
Yeah. So hopefully that's been interesting and useful for you today.
Hopefully.
Of course, any other feedback, do let us know.